Thank you. We know Daniel's really popular, but we didn't know he was quite this popular. So we're doing our best. If people want to sit down, but you really have to make sure the aisles aren't blocked. If someone in a wheelchair, anybody has to get up and leave. So please put yourself against the wall if you're going to be standing or sitting. Did you want to say hi? Our president, Debbie Budd, who has another meeting, is stopping by on her way. So I'm going to let her give greetings, and then I'll, without further ado, introduce Daniel.
Thank you, Joan. Good evening. Good evening, and thank you so much for coming to Berkeley City College this evening. I want to start by thanking Joan Berezin for making this evening possible. And, you know, Berkeley City College is your community college, and I know some of you I've seen around the college, but many of you are community members. How many of you, is this your first time here at Berkeley City College? Great. We have been here in this building since 2006. We just completed a build-out of all of our floors. We have, 3 new science labs. We have art studios, and we really have something for everyone. We have an incredible transfer rate to UC Berkeley. Berkeley City College is one of 112 community colleges in the state, and we are number 2 in the percent of transfers to UC Berkeley and the Northern California UC. So we're really proud of that. We work with our students in the high schools and with foundational skills and have incredible programs, political science, global studies. And we hope to share many of those with you. So please let us know if you'd ever like a tour. And we are just thrilled that we have this wonderful setting to invite the community in and have great members. So thank you so much. Welcome to Berkeley City College. And Joan, thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. So I'm Joan Berezin. I'm the program leader for the Global Studies program and an activist of many years and a longstanding admirer of Daniel's going back to the days of opposition to the Vietnam War. And one of the last times I heard Daniel speak, he said that he had always wanted to meet, it was Bradley Manning at that point, not Chelsea Manning. And I can say if there was one person I always wanted to meet, it was Daniel. And luckily, when I came out to Berkeley, I got the chance to meet him and meet him on several occasions. The last time he spoke here, one of the last things he said to us was, "Where are the whistleblowers?" Well, he's got his answer, and he's going to talk about them tonight. The plan for tonight is that Daniel's going to talk for around 40 minutes. We're going to take a very short break after that. We have a presentation of a gift for him. And I know that some faculty have brought students, and if they need to go at that point, we'll take like a little 5-minute interlude, and then we'll do questions and answers for as long as Daniel feels up to doing it. He said he's a little tired tonight, so it's really going to be up to him. So without further ado, I bring you Daniel Ellsberg.
Thank you very much. This is an impressive crowd here. I'm very glad to see it. Well, there's been some good news lately, from my point of view, and that's pretty rare. So we'll go into that a little later. But some news that is not so wonderful to me today, a little bit of news in today's New York Times that some of you may have missed. The 8th prosecution for leaks under President Barack Obama was just filed the other day now, and the news is in the paper today. An ex-FBI agent who had revealed to the AP a failed bomb plot in Yemen. And the Republicans accused President Obama of administration of leaking classified information about successes to make the administration look good, something that, of course, the Republicans do and Obama does and every president has done all the time. But they were making a major point of that in this case. And it appears from today's paper that for once the favorable news that a bomb plot had been foiled was not leaked deliberately by the administration. And to show that they were the administration was refuting the Republican claims of a deliberate leak in this particular case. They did search, had 500 interviews, and were unable to find, to resolve the case of who had been responsible for the leak. But eventually were able to do so, having secretly subpoenaed the telephone companies for the telephone records of 20 newspaper lines, journalistic telephone lines, including a number of Associated Press lines. And in that, they were quickly able to determine from the telephone calls from the reporter, whose byline was on the piece, to a particular person who was now a contractor, had been an FBI agent, asking for information. They were able to get the content. It's clear from the paper here that they did not only get the fact of the call having been made, but were able to get the content of the conversation. The reporter was asking for information of a certain kind. The FBI, the ex-FBI agent Sackleben, didn't have it at the time, but said he would look into it, and later did find the information. Again, they had the record of the call back to the journalist, and were able to pin him down, so that they got a guilty plea out of him and a sentence he accepted of 43 months in prison for this. A plea bargain, apparently. I take it that they made a deal here. He was threatened with a very much longer sentence, although that's already the longest sentence actually given out in a federal civilian court. And I imagine that Sackleben was impressed by the 35-year sentence that Chelsea Manning got in the court-martial that he was suffering. So they were able to get out of him a plea bargain for 43 months in prison for leaking this information. And the point is made in the paper, now what is almost the cliche to make, this is the 8th prosecution. Only 3 such cases were prosecuted under previous presidents, that is, all previous presidents put together. Now, given that Julian Assange is almost surely the subject, as his lawyers claim, of a sealed indictment in a Virginia grand jury, that would be the 9th case when they serve it on him, when they get to Assange. 3 times as many as all previous presidents put together. Now, that's impressive in itself, if you know it, for a president who came into office promising greater transparency than any previous president, a promise which he has maintained exactly as his inauguration day promise to close Guantanamo. In other words, not at all. And a number of other promises that were made at the time. But what's the significance of this particular one? Not many people focus on the fact, including journalists, of how few there were earlier. Take the 2 aspects of this. 8 or 9 under Obama himself. Does that mean there have been 8 or 9 leaks? There are leaks virtually every other day, if not every day, in one paper or another. Classified information coming out without authorization, or at least allegedly without authorization. Let me correct that. There are far more leaks than that of classified information that are in fact authorized by an agency head or by the White House. Anything that makes a particular agency's actions look good, or a rival agency's actions look bad in the fight for budget money, does get leaked routinely. So that never leads to prosecution, never has, and could be said to be really authorized. A great deal of it is from the White House, and the Republican claim was extremely plausible, although in this particular case, probably not the case. Of course, it doesn't always work out the way the administration wants. They gave extraordinary access to the makers, the writer, director of Zero Dark 30, including the identity and interviews with a person who is the woman in that movie about torture, and getting Osama bin Laden, highly classified. Her very identity remains classified, and yet all of this was made known to the reporters, obviously in hopes that the movie on the whole would make, well, what it does do, make torture, which is clearly illegal under domestic law and international law, look essential to the cause of getting Osama bin Laden, as a matter of fact. And I think the White House was probably not too pleased with the product for one reason or another. I don't know why. Obama gets very little credit in the movie and was probably quite put out by that in the end. But the effect of legitimizing the process of torture as ugly, reluctant to have to do it, but having played an essential role, which happens to be totally untrue. But nevertheless, the information that was given out was clearly classified and made available. Actually, so why only, but when I'm talking about actual unauthorized leaks, those two also happen very frequently. Why only 8 or 9 prosecutions under Obama? And let's look back, why only 3 in the years before that? The act they're using, the Espionage Act, was written in 1917. And one of the clauses they use, paragraph E, it's 18 U.S.C., U.S. Code 793, paragraphs D and E. And I'm not a lawyer, I'm a defendant, but this is the only law that I can roll off like that, because of those 3 cases that were brought, mine was the first. And that was in 1971, 21 years after the law had been amended by the McCarran Act, which was a McCarthy-era act, basically, 1950, or 1917. The first prosecution of anyone under any law for having given information to the American public was my prosecution under 18 U.S.C. 793, paragraphs D and E. And also theft and conspiracy were thrown in, for a possible sentence then of 115 years, or effectively the life sentence that Chelsea Manning was facing, and that Snowden will undoubtedly face when they finish adding counts to his indictment. I think at the moment he's only facing 30 years or something in the first 3 counts, but that was similar to my case. The first indictment was for 3 counts, later extended to 12 for 115 years. Okay, why only 3? And the answer is they didn't have a law. I didn't know that when I did it. I assumed, like everybody else, and I imagine most people here, that we have something equivalent to the British type Official Secrets Act, which criminalizes any release of classified information, whatever the intent, whatever the effect, with no intent to harm the United States or Britain, or to fail to help. You know, even if the intent is clearly to inform the public or to reveal a crime, reveal a deception, whatever. The Official Secrets Act in Britain makes no distinction there. You're violated it if you put out the official information. A number of administrations have proposed Official Secrets Act, and a number of congresspersons have proposed the Official Secrets Act. As a matter of fact, Congress did pass one once. Almost nobody knows this. Nobody knows. When I say nobody, I mean I've talked to judges and in large conferences, lawyers, journalists, and essentially no one is aware that we don't have an Official Secrets Act or any equivalent, nothing that Congress ever passed with the intention of being an Official Secrets Act. We don't have it. 2, that mine was the first prosecution, actually was dismissed for governmental misconduct, so it didn't come to a decision. That there had been, when I used to talk to them, only 2 cases, and then 3 before Obama. That was how few there were. And 4, that Congress had passed an Official Secrets Act once in November 2000. November of 2001. I'm sorry, 2000. And Clinton, 5, had vetoed it on the grounds, citing above all, in particular, the Pentagon Papers case before the Supreme Court, that it was unconstitutional, that it violated, it chilled free speech, and kept out of public discussion information that the public needed to know. Basically, that it subverted our democratic form of government. So Clinton vetoed that. That was before 9/11, and actually, in later years, if this had come to a vote, or if it does come to a vote, almost surely Congress would pass it. and possibly the current Supreme Court, I have to say actually more likely than not, the current Supreme Court would okay it, would fail to notice what earlier courts would almost surely have ruled, that it did violate the Constitution, specifically the First Amendment, freedom of the press, and freedom of speech. Because it's not only the press that's involved here, it's the speech of officials or former officials like myself who see, as Snowden saw, that the Congress was being lied to. One of the factors that Snowden has given for his revelations was reading in the press that the Director of National Intelligence, Clapper, was flatly lying when he said to Congress, to the Intelligence Committee, that they were not collecting information on millions of Americans, which they are. And not only millions, hundreds of millions, everybody, essentially. He said, oh, I didn't realize that by collect you meant record and store. They count as collecting only when the file is retrieved and analyzed and read by human eyes. The fact that it is on record to be retrieved automatically whenever they want to type a name in or to pursue something didn't, in his mind, amount to collection or a violation of the Fourth Amendment, which says that our privacy shall not be violated, as the British were doing before the Revolution, without probable cause of an actual crime having been committed. Strong reason to believe that you're investigating a crime, and specifically and narrowly asking for what is to be searched or seized. That's our Fourth Amendment. And in researching this as it came up just recently, couldn't say that I was aware that that was regarded by Adams and others as one of the key triggers of the revolution, that one of the major complaints of the colonists was the general warrants that were issued to British soldiers just to go and take a look at whatever was in your house, whatever they could find, and seize whatever. That was something we wanted to get away from. That's the Fourth Amendment. Clearly violated by the NSA now, whatever Congress says, and frankly, whatever the Supreme Court says. If the Supreme Court ultimately says no violation here, which 5 justices might do, well, that would be the law, that would be the Constitution, they're the ones who decide, but it would be a change in our form of government. It would be essentially a rescinding, a repeal of the Fourth Amendment without the process of amendment that our Constitution provides for. That wouldn't be the First Amendment that has had that little problem. The First Amendment, freedom of speech and the press, is greatly challenged by these prosecutions, which are basically new under Obama, as you say, 8 or 9 versus 3 earlier, 2 of which were dismissed ultimately. The third was the APAC case, which was dismissed actually under Obama because it involved people who weren't officials. There's been only 1 jury conviction since my case, 1971, or the Espionage Act, 1917, which isn't really relevant because the espionage was not intended to deal with disclosures to the American public. So you can't really close it. It was a creative, imaginative thought of the Justice Department to make do with the Espionage Act in prosecuting me and these other leaks. Now, there was no question that in my mind, that when I copied 7,000 pages of top secret documents and gave them to the Senate, which had been denied them on a number of occasions when they specifically asked, and finally gave them to the newspapers when the Senate failed to hold the hearings that Senator Fulbright had originally promised me he would hold. He was afraid that he would lose access to classified material in the future if he revealed this, which he had every legal right to do. No question about that. And other senators refused to. So eventually I gave it to the New York Times, and most of you know, some of you don't, that that led to the first injunction in our history, with the First Amendment having been passed by everyone's agreement, lawyers' agreement, with the very specific purpose of preventing prior restraint or forbidding a paper to publish something before it had published. Now, several of the justices at the time, in fact, 5 of them, commented that that didn't preclude criminal prosecution of the press or the sources after it had been printed. And they were arguing, they said that offhand, oberdictive, obviously ignorant, since no such case had ever come to them before, that there hadn't ever been such a prosecution, and that the reason there hadn't ever been such a prosecution was that Congress had always rejected the administration's proposal to criminalize all disclosures, unauthorized disclosures, on the grounds that it was a violation of the First Amendment. So to some extent, I forgive the justices at that time for making such a comment, but meanwhile, I was indicted. I knew that I was certainly violating a promise that I had made many times, actually, a secrecy agreement. Not an oath, actually. You always hear about secrecy oaths, and you don't take an oath for secrecy, at least in the levels I was doing, and so help me God and all that. You sign an agreement, as people do with corporations, or who knows, you may have one here at Berkeley Community College. I promise not to disclose this or that from faculty meetings or whatever it might be to unauthorized persons. And obviously, in corporations or unions or PTAs or whatever that make such agreements, you have to expect that if you violate it, you have lost the trust of your colleagues or your superiors. You can be fired. You can, in the government, lose access to that information. You can be deprived of a clearance in general, so you can't have access to it in general, which means really the end of a career without that, taking that clearance away, which doesn't allow for very much appeal or process, ends your career, essentially. And may well, depending on what your specialty is, mean greatly diminishing your income. Because people whose specialty now, let's say, is in satellite communications or something like that, are going to find it very hard to be hired by corporations that depend on contracts with the Department of Defense or NSA or state, CIA, whatever. Russell Tice. Actually, all the whistleblowers from NSA have had this problem. Thomas Drake, who revealed to Congress the fact that the NSA was acting totally unconstitutionally with warrantless wiretaps of everyone. He told that to Congress, and they couldn't get him on that because that was not a good legal case to say that he couldn't say that in classified conversations with congressional staff. But they looked at him very hard then. They suspected him of revealing that to the Times, although he hadn't. And eventually, they got all of his files, all of his computers, and eventually charged him with having revealed classified information, which he hadn't. The document that they accused him of having released was unclassified, but they said it should have been classified, and he should have known that. So they classified it after they confiscated it from him. Well, the judge, after about 2.5 years of this in court, in which he had lost all of his savings for legal fees, put very great strain on his marriage, been unemployed, in fact, mortgaged his house, I think lost his house, essentially. Finally, when it came to court, the judge was totally contemptuous of the government of this, totally condemning, said this was a mockery of justice, etc., refused to give him the years of prison or even probation that they asked for, gave him community service. They wanted a huge fine. He said, well, you've already deprived him of all of his assets and whatnot. For the last couple of years, he has been employed as a consultant at an Apple store, a local Apple store. This was one of the highest NSA officials, actually, before that. And much was done to the other NSA whistleblowers. So it's a very intimidating process. As I say, I had signed a number of such agreements. I assumed that there must be a law I was breaking. And with 7,000 top secret pages, I figured, well, they'll give me a life sentence. Definitely, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison. And I thought at that time in the war, the Vietnam War, that was worth it. I had the example of people who had gone to to prison for a few years. Like me, at Harvard, Randy Keeler was a Harvard man like me, and he had chosen, he left Stanford to work with the War Resisters Office in San Francisco, and eventually, being the last man to be out of prison, he was going to prison for draft resistance. And that example put in my head, well, what can I do to help shorten the war now that I'm ready to go to prison? So after a few weeks and so forth, the Pentagon Papers offered themselves as something that would help, a history of the war. Now, as I say, I expected to go to prison. That overshadowed the fact that my career for the government of 15 years or so was over, obviously. Clearance was over, all this sort of thing. My case is one of the rare instances where the marriage was not destroyed by this experience. Most whistleblowers' marriages in the corporate world, as well as government, last on the average 18 months. A statistical study indicated a fairly wide length, on the grounds that the spouse hadn't signed up for this, losing all their friends, leaving the region of the country, usually, where they had to work, having no income, college education for kids, very strong sanctions without the question of prosecution, which doesn't exist, of course, in the corporate world in that case. You can be sued for non-disclosure, breaking a non-disclosure agreement, but you can't be imprisoned. Such sanction, what I didn't know, as I say, was that no one ever had been prosecuted. I had signed many agreements, all of which had a footnote saying, I understand that violation of this agreement may lead to prosecution under 18 U.S.C. 793, paragraphs D and E. I couldn't have given you that reference over all those years because I didn't pay any attention to it. I didn't have any intention of being subject to prosecution for that, and or leaking. I thought leaking was very bad, very disloyal to the president, to my party, to my agency, Department of Defense. And I thought ill of people who did leak, and I eventually learned better on that in the course of the war. But what I didn't know, what they didn't tell you was, no one ever has been prosecuted under this, let alone the reason that prosecutions were regarded as unconstitutional of that Espionage Act, which doesn't make any provision, nor does the British Official Secrets Act, for a necessity to warn the public, a need to inform the public, a need to reveal reckless policies or deceptive policies, as I was doing with the Pentagon Papers. That's what makes it clearly unconstitutional as a regime. And that's the way the laws are, that they're using in all of these prosecutions. I would say that by the standards of 1973, when I was on the last part of my trial, by those standards, or earlier, 1971, when Justices Black and Douglas were on the court, and some others that were very good, all these laws are unconstitutional. All of the, in this respect, these prosecutions are. It's never gone yet to the Supreme Court. The one case that led to a jury acquittal, which was appealed, was denied certiorari by the Supreme Court. So they've never actually ruled on this yet, and it remains to be seen how they would rule now. Which, although as I say, the odds are much worse for freedom of speech as of now, but not certainly. For example, I've heard that Scalia occasionally does come out on behalf of certain civil liberties, freedom of speech. Can't be relied on. He would split from Thomas in this particular case, possibly. So maybe it would come out all right. Does it matter now? Well, pardon me. What I'm saying is that statement in those agreements, I might be prosecuted, was essentially a bluff for all the years since the Second World War, when classification became the rule for civilians. And they were bluffing, they were threatening, without actually trying to see how this would come out in front of the Supreme Court. It's no longer a bluff, so that's changed. Now people have to expect, even when it favors the administration, they'll prove to the Republicans, if they can find you, that they'll get you if it's not authorized. And they can find you now. Apparently before this shows how effective these 20 secret subpoenas for the AP telephone wires, which the AP was not told about, how effective they were. They'd been working for a year. They'd interviewed 500 people. They had not determined the source. That would seem odd, actually, but if you read the story, you can see why. This particular guy was a really out in the boonies, sort of. He was a contractor working on quite different things. And he, at the request of a journalist, he actually investigated it on his own. He didn't get this information in the normal course of his duties. They probably would never have guessed that he knew what he revealed, except for these phone calls. Now, the fact is that what Snowden really is revealing, as expanded, elaborated a little by the other NSA officials, Tom Drake, Kurt Wiebe, William Binney, the NSA doesn't just collect metadata, so-called, which they've been saying. The administration keeps saying, don't worry about it, just these numbers, a lot of numbers that tell who called who, when, that's all. And other people have pointed out you can learn a lot from that. As in this case, pretty much the metadata was enough to show that the guy had been in contact with this journalist at this time. And that's what they're using in the case of Jay Rosen of Fox News. They could see that just when he went to the State Department, just when he was in contact with the paper, no, he was the journalist, I'm sorry, but who his source was in contact with. They got it all from the phone messages, and you can do that almost from the metadata. But they don't just collect the metadata. They collect everything, the content, everything about it. It's not just the names in the subject heading, which is part of the metadata, that they're interested in. Obviously, they're interested in names in the body of the message and what is said. Russ Tice of NSA told me just the other day that their machine analysis does screen this stuff to throw away spam, if possible. Get rid of the spam so that they don't clog themselves with spam. So he says, if they see the word Viagra or Cialis or maybe send me money to Nigeria, so he says he kind of automatically has a heading in this. Do you need Viagra at low prices? So his messages are somewhat immune. But otherwise, they get everything. Now, a lot of people who have heard what Snowden has to say so far have said, well, I give all this stuff to Google or to the telephone company. Why should I worry if the government has it? And the president of Google, Eric Schmidt, said, if you have nothing to hide, what's the problem? And if you're doing something that you don't want people to know about, he actually said, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Okay. A lot of people feel that way, probably in this audience. Why should I care? I'm not in an affair, or I'm not married, or I don't cheat on my income taxes at all, whatever it might be. I don't need to hide from the government. But I would ask such people, do you think that your Congress representatives have nothing to hide? Are you quite confident of that? How about their staffs? And specifically, what about journalists? Now we've got a class here. People who are authorized under our Constitution, not only authorized, but encouraged to investigate the executive branch. Every journalist, every source is, according to Tice, essentially targeted, not beforehand, but every journalist and news agency are targeted. And if they want to find the source of any leak, they can now do it pretty easily. You're living in a world, can you really have investigative journalism with no anonymity promised or given, to sources? How about Congress? They used to investigate. We had Watergate investigations hearings, for example. I just thought of this the other night. Could you have had a Watergate investigation if the Nixon administration knew instantly every person that in the government to whom the investigators of the Congressional Committee was talking and what they were saying? No, impossible. Nixon would have stayed and would have been very safe from that kind of process. And go back, take a broader look at this for a minute. The founders of our Constitution were certainly not perfect men, and they weren't perfect. They were all men, and white males, many of them slaveholders, not too interested, certainly not interested in ending slavery, and not really interested in giving women the vote. It comes to that. Most of them property owners, etc. They had their distinct limitations as a group, and the Constitution had real limitations. It did protect slavery, which is really not a minor defect, actually, in the Constitution. But they had some very good ideas. And they did design a government that was not to be run by angels or people that you could put all your trust in, but they designed a government of 3 independent branches, separate but overlapping but separate powers, and really a 4th estate with freedom of the press to investigate and to hold accountable and to inform the public, with Congress having the power to subpoena, to investigate, to impeach, and very, very important. It wasn't just the Watergate investigation that was important here. And to pass legislation that could rein in the executive powers in various cases. Can you have that government? Can you have that government in a situation where the executive, one of the branches, the executive branch, knows every detail of the private life of every member of Congress, every staff person, every journalist, every source or potential source, every judge? Very specifically, Russell Tice says that when he was in the and has not been refuted on this, by the way, that when he was in the NSA, he was for many years, but particularly in the years 2003, 4, and 5, he held in his hands the phone data of Justice Alito and was aware that every other justice was individually targeted. Every member of every important committee in Congress, important to the NSA, controlling their budget, for example, armed services, the intelligence committees, and then foreign affairs. Dianne Feinstein, at various times, head of the Intelligence Committee. They had her targeted for her home phones, her office phones, her staff entirely. Is it conceivable that actually a situation like that can result in actual check or balance or monitoring of the executive branch? I don't think so. The ability to manipulate, to coerce, to blackmail, or just simply to shut off sources to all these people comes close to being extremely reliable. We don't have a police state at this point. If we did, I wouldn't be talking to you. And I would be in detention, almost surely, indefinite detention, as the National Defense Authorization Act allows me to be right now, or any of you. We don't have a police state like this on East Germany. But we have a surveillance state that goes beyond anything the world has ever seen, including anything beyond the dreams of the Stasi, the secret police of East Germany. If you look at the film, The Lives of Others, about the Stasi, which I recommend you do, think in terms of the fact that's a fictional film, but very impressive, and shows you the ability of the Stasi even then to make informers out of anyone, basically. Does your daughter want to continue in college? One of the lines in the movie. Then keep your mouth shut about what you've just seen. And what you've just seen is, the person had just seen, was the wiretapping of a playwright's apartment, for the purpose of getting information on him to detain him because he was in the way of a secret police officer who wanted his girlfriend, who wanted his lover, partner. And in fact, in the movie, the partner herself is made into an informer by the threat that what she wants most in the world, to remain on the stage, will simply be over if she doesn't. Think of how, actually this guy was found on the telephone. Think of Spitzer, or for that matter, Wiener. You know, a joke or not, but the fact is, two relatively progressive representatives, guys, who were weeded out very quickly by this. In the Stasi era, there were no personal computers. There was no email. There was no internet. There was no chat logs, no credit card transactions, and certainly no GPS on your smartphones, no smartphones, which tell the NSA at every moment where you are and what paths are intersecting at that moment. So Stasi, had they had that ability, well, they would, as I say, beyond their wildest dreams. We don't have what the Stasi were able to do, is calling people in routinely and asking them, threatening them, you know, manipulating them generally, putting them in indefinite detention for a while, scaring them in that way yet. But with one more 9/11, I think they have the ability to create a police state on a level the world has never seen in its efficiency of putting people in detention camps, with our present president and others having claimed the right to detain American citizens and non-American citizens indefinitely, without charges, without a warrant, a kind of charge that went out with the Magna Carta 800 years ago in England, not just at the time of the Revolution. So it's a cliche to say to a graduating class, college people, to inspire them, you stand at a crossroads. You know, destiny is in your hands. You can go this way or that way. It's a cliche that's usually wrong because very often the country is not at a crossroads. It's on a freeway with no exit for a long time, barreling along, and the choices that might have been made are way behind you. And that may be the case today, except that we have learned now where it's going, where this highway is going. And this highway is going in a world where 9/11s can be expected on some scale or other. They can't be eliminated. And other situations, wartime situations, as with Syria or Iran, conceivably. Detention camps can sprout on a much greater scale than the Japanese in World War II. Middle Easterners, Muslims, dissidents, troublemakers, like myself and others, put them in camps, basically. We know that possibility now and what it's gone, and the question is, will we or will we not do anything about it? Can we? There are actually a number of bills right now in Congress. I saw the headline that the nightmare of National Security Agency is about 13 or more bills that are presently pending since Snowden. So he absolutely did get the discussion and the moves toward change here that he hoped for, and that Manning hoped for but didn't really get in this country. As Manning said to Adrian Lamo in the chat logs, if there's no debate, he said what he wanted was debate, informed discussion, without which there's no democracy. He said, if nobody pays any attention to this, I despair for the species. Well, that seems grandiose. You know, some of species, what are we talking about here? Actually, in the world where nuclear war can still break out on a basis of a false alarm as we speak, any day of the week, certainly during an international crisis, shall we say, a war in which Russia and we, which both have huge alert forces enough to destroy Earth with nuclear winter, are on alert, subject to false alarm or in pressures to preempt. Think about a war in which we would be on opposite sides. Syria, as a matter of fact. That's very clearly the potential that was there. Now, just the other day, well, a couple of weeks ago, when President Obama changed his mind about an imminent attack on Syria, which everyone expected. I know of no one who did not expect that when the inspectors left, the UN inspectors left Syria, which was Saturday, August 31st, that there would be an attack. And essentially everyone, and quite possibly as they left, just after they left, which would have been Saturday evening. And on Saturday afternoon, against the advice, it turned out, of all of his advisors, except for his chief of staff, who he spent an hour and a half talking to, he decided to put the matter to Congress. He didn't say, and still hasn't said, that he would be bound by the decision of Congress. But he did say that, he said, I recalled that, interesting formulation, I recalled that I had the world's oldest constitutional republic. Actually, I shouldn't mock that, because it didn't occur to me till I read that we are the oldest. I wouldn't have thought that. Could that really be the oldest one? But that's not a self-evident point. But he also recalled that we were a constitutional republic. And he actually obeyed the Constitution by putting this at least for a congressional vote, which he had not done in the case of Libya, which he claimed, by the way, was not a war because Americans were not at risk. Only the people we were bombing were at risk. So it was not a war. Actually, nobody has pointed, I think no one has pointed out, you're the first to hear this point, isn't that true of what he was planning for Syria? He made a tremendous case, no boots on the ground, except Kerry said, well, maybe, actually, there might be a few, but basically kept saying over again, no boots on the ground, cruise missiles, or what he was talking about from destroyers. Now, how are Americans going to be at risk in that? So no war, right? So why should he go to Congress? Well, two of his own former secretaries of defense before Hagel, Gates, brought over from Bush, and Panetta, together criticized him in a panel they were in. How many people have heard this, by the way? You know what I'm talking about here. Is this not a familiar point? Gates and Panetta were at a panel. One person? Really? It's interesting. Okay, I wish I had the exact words with you here, but you can look it up. They both criticized him strongly and said he should not have gone to Congress. These are his secretaries of defense. Again, it may just be my aging memory here now, but I don't recall another instance where somebody who had just left office in good odor, not been fired or anything, criticized his or her boss during the same administration for something they had just done. Does anybody remember that? But it's not done. But here they both were saying he should not have gone to Congress. And what were they criticizing him for? They were criticizing him for obeying the Constitution. And let me spell that out a little bit. This is not the First Amendment. This is Article 1, Section 8, which says the power to declare war shall rest exclusively or rest with Congress. Now, that has been interpreted by various administration lawyers, paid mafia lawyer types, that just means declaration of war. That's just a piece of paper. We don't declare war anymore. That's an obsolete idea. Last time we did it was the Second World War. But most constitutional scholars, all of those who deserve respect as constitutional scholars, I've cleverly excluded John Yoo from this category here. YOO are Berkeley, not community college. You don't have to apologize for John Yoo, but community college, College of Constitutional Law, who said that in his books that, and who was in the Office of Legal Counsel under Bush, and wrote the memorandums supposedly legalizing torture and the invasion of Iraq, a clear-cut case of aggression. He said, and this is what Gates and Panetta are basically drawing on, the same point of view, that the Constitution had meant to carry over the powers of the British monarch in the role of war and peace. I see an and astonished. I think we have a scholar here, or do we? You don't have to be a constitutional scholar to know that is 180 degrees wrong. Nothing could be clearer than the fact, A, they did not want a king, and B, above all, they did not want a leader, a president, an executive, with the specific power of the king to go to war. And they, as Madison said, it is ever the executive that is most interested in war making and in going to war, and for that reason our founders wisely put the power of going to war in the hands of a representative large body of people, men at that time, the Congress. Lincoln said, in opposing the Mexican War, that he said, as I understand it, our founders understood that that kings were the ones who were prone to go to war, and that this was regarded as the most oppressive of kingly prerogatives. And it was their intent to take that power away from the executive and give it to Congress so that we would be less likely to go to war, and especially one that was reckless, miserable, aggressive, as the Mexican War was. As U.S. Grant put it, the most wicked war that had ever existed, he thought, in the tradition of European monarchies. And I want to, you can look up Lincoln on this on Google easily enough, a letter to his law partner William Herndon in 1848 on the Mexican War, easy to find. Okay, that was a good idea. Article 1, Section 8 was a good idea. The reason that Gates and Panetta are criticizing the president, their own party, for having obeyed that, honestly, to an extent that he had not done in Libya, and which most presidents have at least paid some slight attention to going to Congress, none of them have really taken the attitude for a long time what the Constitution says. It is not, Congress is not to be consulted. It's not with advice or consent, or you don't want to just hear their opinion, which Obama is actually still implying now. Obama says in his very message, he said he had the authority. He said, I have the authority to go without Congress, but I think it's appropriate to go to Congress. Where does he get this authority? It's not in the Constitution, and it's in nowhere, actually. It's a tremendous abuse to claim that authority and certainly to act on it in any way. And yet we've come to a point where cabinet officers, former cabinet officers, are able to perceive that as dangerous and wrongful. Now, why are they saying that? You say, well, on the one hand, he had drawn a red line on this, and he was allowing Congress now to take that away from him, And second, even the precedent of going to Congress, of obeying the Constitution in this way, was dangerous because it might bind the hands of future presidents. And basically, the overall point is it ruins our credibility. He's made the threat, and he hasn't carried it out. Or he may not carry it out, because when he made it, when he went to Congress, I believe it was with the expectation that even though the polls were against him and Congress was not on his side at the moment, that he could bring them around with the help of AIPAC and others, twisting arms, that they would go. And I think it was a surprise and a disappointment to him, largely, or certainly to his administration, that it turned out that he couldn't carry out his threat right away. Now, it's true that a president of a constitutional republic cannot make threats as credibly as an autocrat, as a dictator, as an absolute monarch, like a Hitler or a Saddam Hussein with a rubber stamp legislature, or whoever else. It's true that he can't, that he's really only allowed to make threats to say, at most, if you do this, cross this red line, I will recommend to Congress and urge them and press them to enable me, to do the following. That would be the Constitution. And that's not as impressive a threat, obviously, to say, by God, when I say goes, I am the decider, as George W. Bush put it. it was the intent of the founders to take away that degree of credibility from a president. And to live in the world, for us to live in the world, without the ability of a president to go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, which is what John Adams said America does not do. Well, it does do it now. And to be sure, you can go abroad in search of monsters to destroy much more freely and easily if you don't even have to listen to Congress at all or the public. And I think there was, I'll get to the end here. I think there was even one more aspect to the credibility here. The reason they're so concerned about his credibility of a threat to do an action that would be unconstitutional and illegal under international law, because without a Security Council authorization, the cruise missiles would have been totally illegal, an act of aggression, a crime against the peace, whatever the reason given for them. So it would be unconstitutional, illegal, and extremely foolish, reckless, stupid, moving us toward not only involvement in an extremely complicated and dangerous, difficult conflict, in no way as promising as Vietnam, let's say, or Iraq. How about that? Far less promising of our achieving any benefit. But also getting us involved in war with Iran. And I think Israel, I'll give my own opinion here, I think Israel's interest in pressing for this, as AIPAC did press very strongly to try to get a favorable vote to this, they failed in this particular case, is really to move us toward the credibility of, move us toward the enactment of another illegal, reckless, and unconstitutional act, namely an attack on Iran, which I think, not Israel as a whole, but the Likud party, Netanyahu, and others, this is my opinion, that's what they want. An American Israeli attack on Iran that will not just change regime, but take it apart as a society and a rival to Israeli power in the Middle East. And some Americans want that as well. I think it would be a catastrophe. But of course, I think from that point of view, the best thing that Obama could have done is either ignore Congress or go to Congress, get a vote against the attack, and ignore it, showing that nobody can stop me. I've drawn a red line in Iran, no capability for nuclear weapons, or actually no possession of nuclear weapons. To attack, to carry out that threat would be, without Congress, illegal, unconstitutional, would be without the UN, which we wouldn't get, illegal, but nobody can stop me from carrying it out. That would be the best demonstration of credibility. I think we would be very, very much safer in the world, and the world would be a safer place. And not only the Middle East, but the whole world, if presidents were deprived of that kind of freedom and that kind of credibility.